Looking at the games industry these days, with its seemingly endless slew of slated reboots, remasters and remakes, it would be easy to think that publishers might be getting a little bit creatively bankrupt. Who'd have thought, eh? However, not all remakes are remade equal. Over the last few decades, plenty have come along that for a myriad of reasons were well worth it. So in honour of the Dead Space remake, absolutely nailing it, I'm Joe from WhatCulture and here are 8 video game remakes that were totally justified. Number 8. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2. While remaking the classic PS1 Tony Hawk titles may not have seemed entirely necessary, it makes much more sense given the wider context of the franchise as a whole. After years of critical acclaim, the Tony Hawk series was beginning to lose momentum, with the popular underground titles giving way to the overly easy and somewhat stale American wasteland. Project 8 and Proving Ground were admirable attempts at a back-to-basics approach, but these were then followed by Ride and Shred, a pair of barely functional, gimmicky, peripheral-centric disasters. There wasn't another mainline Tony Hawk entry until 2015's Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5. With the Tony Hawk license about to expire, the game was rushed out unfinished in just a few months and was plagued with bugs and glitches to the point of being unplayable. It was a sad end to what had been a classic series. With the franchise all but dead, it took another 5 years until Vicarious Visions released remakes of the first 2 Tony Hawk games in all their next-gen glory. Returning to beloved locations such as School 2, Downtown and Venice Beach is an absolute nostalgic joy, and the inclusion of various mechanics from later games such as reverts and spine transfers allows for the kind of absurd lines once only possible in those titles. Cashing in on nostalgia has rarely been so satisfying. Number 7. Metroid Zero Mission. It can't be disputed that 1987's Metroid has been a huge influence on the video game industry as a whole. The fact that it lends its name to the now omnipresent Metroidvania genre, permeating everything from indie darlings like The Messenger to behemoths such as Dark Souls, is telling enough. Metroid's world building and atmosphere is unrivaled amongst Nintendo's first-party IP, with its claustrophobic tunnels and hostile alien lifeforms clearly inspired by Ridley Scott's Alien. Sadly, the very first game in the series has been reduced to more of an interesting historical artifact than an enjoyable game. Its lack of any kind of map makes its sprawling cave system a confusing chore to navigate, and its limited movement and aiming system does it no favours. Metroid Zero Mission, released for the Game Boy Advance in 2004, rectified all of these issues. The inclusion of abilities and equipment from later entries such as Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion were welcome additions that greatly improved the game's exploration potential, but it was the implementation of a map that truly made this a title that easily outshines the original. Zero Mission's added epilogue is also an interesting twist on Metroid's core gameplay, adding some extra challenge and cleverly weaving in some extra lore to tie into the following games in the series. Number 6. Demon's Souls. When Demon's Souls first launched back in 2009, it wasn't met with quite the same fawning adulation we've come to expect from a new From Software title. While well received, it was considered a little too obtuse and over-reliant on sudden, unfair traps and ambushes. It would be 2011's Dark Souls that audiences truly latched onto, and as the Soulsborne/Souls-like/miserable death march through a cruel world genre took hold, Demon's Souls was largely overlooked. Bluepoint Games' PS5 exclusive remake, released in 2020, is pretty much a one-to-one recreation of Demon's Souls, and in fact includes some mechanics that, if anything, increase its difficulty. However, the reality is that Demon's Souls didn't need mitigation or anything in the way of improvement to get the recognition it deserved. The game was ahead of its time, and it was the audience that wasn't ready. Sure, there'll be legions of fanboys who will angrily comment that they were always big fans of Demon's Souls, but let's face it, the game didn't have a fraction of the profile that Dark Souls has. This fresh lick of paint on a better supported console will bring a flawed but nevertheless outstanding achievement to a wider audience with the benefit of hindsight. Number 5. Mafia Definitive Edition. Despite having released a year after the meteoric success of crime sandbox giant Grand Theft Auto 3, 2002's Mafia was not, as it may have looked, intended to capitalize on the burgeoning new genre. Mafia's gameplay is considerably more grounded. Unlike GTA's 6-star standoffs with the military, players can be booked by police for carrying a visible weapon or even running a red light. Unfortunately, this can at times make the game feel incredibly clunky and weighed heavily against the player. And that's not to mention the infamous Fair Play mission, a racing section so broken and awkward that many took it as a cue to nope out entirely. After the success of following Mafia entries, Mafia 3 developer Hangar 13 set about remaking the original from the ground up in order to bring it up to date with the rest of the trilogy. The result is an absolutely stunning recreation of the City of Lost Heaven, keeping the story intact but expanding it just enough to improve upon it. With retooled gameplay that borrows from Mafia 3, Mafia Definitive Edition feels much more polished and responsive than its forebear, and the updated graphics, voice work and animation allow the game to tell its story more convincingly than ever. Most importantly, however, fair play is actually, well, fair. Number 4. Yakuza Kiwami. Until 2020's Yakuza Like a Dragon arrived on the scene and completely shook things up, the Yakuza series had settled into a comfortable little formula for itself. Now, that's not the criticism it sounds like. Exploring the streets of Kamurocho, alternating between uncovering sinister criminal conspiracies, brutally beating thugs with entire bicycles, and blowing it all off to play Scalextrics is endless, tonally inconsistent fun. While the series' 3rd, 4th and 5th entries were easily remastered for the PS4 with little more than a resolution and frame rate bump, things weren't so easy for earlier titles native to the PS2. Yakuza 1 and 2 were presented using semi-fixed camera angles and scene transitions, making the world feel like a series of separate areas rather than a sprawling, cohesive city centre. The first game was also released with an English language dub that even the most charitable player would call embarrassing. When updating Yakuza 1 to modern consoles, the game was rebuilt using prequel Yakuza 0's engine and the original Japanese audio track, thus bringing it firmly in line with the most current entry of the time. Coupled with the inclusion of side activities such as Pocket Circuit and the hilarious Majima Everywhere system, Yakuza Kiwami is the perfect way to experience the franchise's debut. Number 3. The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. While the 3 Legend of Zelda titles most likely to top any ranked list are undoubtedly A Link to the Past, Breath of the Wild, and Ocarina of Time, one game that absolutely deserves to be included in the conversation is the series' first handheld outing, Link's Awakening. Opening with Link, or Thief as most of us ended up being named, washed up on the shores of Koholint Island, the game successfully distances itself from the familiar land of Hyrule and series staples Zelda and Ganon. It's a refreshing change of scenery, something that we sadly haven't seen a great deal across the franchise as a whole. The game also gives us one of the most melancholy and thought-provoking entries in the entire series. The 2019 remake for the Nintendo Switch is very much a one-to-one recreation of the original. However, what it does offer is a lovely new aesthetic to Koholint Island and its inhabitants. The characters and other models bear a resemblance to ceramic ornaments, with the entire world looking like a beautiful diorama. This audio-visual overhaul, coupled with a control scheme that vastly improves on the Game Boy version's often awkward handling given its lack of buttons, would be enough to recommend Link's Awakening. Its greatest selling point, however, is its mere existence, allowing a new generation of players to experience an oft-overlooked classic. Number 2. Resident Evil 2. The Resident Evil series seems to have become addicted to remaking its older entries. 2002 saw the first game get a remaster for the GameCube, and in recent years we've seen remakes of further games spring up with varying degrees of necessity, with a remake of RE4 just around the corner. With regards to Resident Evil's PS1 trilogy, Resident Evil 2 is generally held in the highest regard. It introduced series favourite Leon Kennedy and the wider world of Raccoon City, and still shoots for a serious and mature tone before the franchise began to lean into its more camp nature. That attempted seriousness, however, doesn't hold up especially well 25 years on. While still effective, many elements of the game that were once terrifying now come across as a little quaint. 2019's remake of RE2, without exaggeration, brought all that terror back with a vengeance. Utilising Resident Evil 4's over-the-shoulder camera and fully realised 3D environments, being hunted through Raccoon Police Department by a now ever-present Mr. X and his sporty little Trilby is a bone-chilling experience from start to finish. In retaining the original's darker tone with fantastic presentation and voice acting, Resident Evil 2's remake is gritty and grim, an exemplar of its craft and a strong contender for the greatest remakes in gaming history. And number 1, Black Mesa. While every other remake on this list is undoubtedly worth playing, Crowbar Collective's Black Mesa stands head and shoulders above the rest for one reason. It began as a labour of love with no financial incentive. Development of Black Mesa began all the way back in 2004 as a response to the disappointing release of Valve's own Half-Life Source, an update of the original Half-Life ported to the then revolutionary Source engine. Unlike Half-Life Source, Black Mesa aimed to completely rebuild and update the world of Half-Life 1 in Source, rather than simply change the engine and call it a day. It wasn't until 2012 that Black Mesa Source was released as a free mod for Half-Life 2, covering the entire game up to the original's divisive Zen chapters. The result was an astounding recreation of the Black Mesa facility, with its architecture reworked to feel more believable and its atmosphere impressively overhauled. Valve themselves were so impressed that they suggested Crowbar Collective make Black Mesa a commercial release. The finished game has been out since 2020 and is an absolutely remarkable achievement. Despite using an engine now approaching 20 years old, Black Mesa still feels polished and exceptionally modern. A work born of pure dedication and a more than worthy evolution of one of the greatest shooters of all time, it's an absolute essential play and deserves every single one of its accolades. And there we have it, 8 video game remakes that were totally justified. Did we miss any? Let me know down in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe and all that other good stuff. For now, I've been Joe, this has been WhatCulture Gaming. You can follow my dog on Instagram at Daphne_Greyhound, and until next time, take care.